Good afternoon, everyone. Today I have the honor to introduce Professor Panagiotis Metaxas. He's a professor of computer science and founder of the Media Arts and Sciences program at Wellesley College. He has been member of the Albright Institute faculty since it started in 2009. About a year ago in December, he was in London for the Albright Institute event London Calling and was on a panel with the speaker before, Charlie Beckett, and also Rangita, who spoke to us last week. He studied mathematics at the University of Athens and computer science at Brown University. He also has a PhD in computer science from Dartmouth, and he taught as adjunct faculty of the PhD program there before coming to Wellesley. He spent a couple of years working as a chief technology officer of a biotech company specializing in computerized tests for measuring the symptoms of mental disorders. And he's now research associate at the Developmental Biopsychiatry Research Program at McLean Hospital of the Harvard Medical School. His research interests are currently in social computing, web science, propagation of information and misinformation in cyberspace, including web spam, and cognitive hacking. His recent work on evaluating quality on web search results, Twitter bombs, and the relationship between web spam and social propaganda has been recognized with 3 Best Paper Awards. He has also received 2 APGAR Awards for teaching excellence and 2 Brackman-Hoffman Fellowships. Please join me in welcoming Professor Metaxas.
Thank you very much. In 25 years in the United States, this is the first time I heard my full name pronounced correctly. Thank you so very much. So this is the title of my talk, and thank you all for not only coming, but completing the questionnaire I sent you earlier today. You remember I sent you this questionnaire and I got some answers. So I ask you, where do you look for answers? It is actually nicely connected now that we have seen Charlie's talk. The two things have a common theme about, the two talks have a common theme about how we are searching for information. So I gave you, for a bunch of questions, these different choices. And the question I want to ask you now, I'll show you your answer in a second. How did you decide in every question which boxes to check, which one of those to actually check? What were your criteria?
Depending on the question.
Okay.
The question about the Senate bus running, like getting into Ahmed family. So it depended on the question.
So sometimes, so give me some criteria then. What would be?
Like who will have that information?
Who might be knowledgeable of that? Yeah. All right.
Convenience in the fastest.
Convenience. Yeah.
I figured out for every single question I check the internet, so I guess it's just the easiest and knows everything person.
Right. Convenience again, easy to reach. Yeah.
What I'd done in the past for that specific question, what I had looked up or used as a...
So you retraced your steps back if you had already searched about that. You know, so looking at your own criteria in the past. Yeah. Privacy. In the sense that what
For example, the question about abortion. If I wanted to get an abortion, maybe I would not want to discuss this with a professor or a family member because it's a private issue.
Right, it is a private issue, but I think the title you want to give more there is something like trust, whether you want to trust the people that they're coming. All right, I think I got enough of these answers because knowledge is the first of the things you answered, trust and convenience. These are all things that we're using. I hope I don't miss anything else that you actually used as a criteria. So I'll tell you what you responded. The first, whether you can get the flu by handling money. These are the sequence of answers, and the lengths of the bars will tell you how many of you chose that in particular. For this kind of things, we go almost directly to the web. We had 31 answers, so that shows you wouldn't look an ad for that. And you would not ask a random person, but you would search the web. Who was the inventor of television? Here, the web is the big thing, You might have a professor around, but the web was probably much more closer to you. You might go to some books. Wellesley to Cambridge bus. I found this interesting because I suspect that all of you know whether there is a bus going to Boston, no? Or almost all of you. Yet even in this case, like everybody will check the web, probably to make sure that today is running or something, right? Yeah, yeah, because you know the answer to this question. Morality, this is something in which the internet did not come first. The only, actually, that the internet did not come first. Consulting friends or family, where the trust is important, this was the winner. Consulting a book was the winner, the second winner, and the internet was third, but still had half of the answers. Whether can technology help reduce poverty? Is it possible that it can't? I mean, we're using technology exactly to help us solve this kind of problems, right? Of course, you would say, well, maybe it cannot, but we know that it has helped over the years. Yet, even in this case, which you should know the answer, you went to the web. By the way, your answers do not look any different than the answers I got from Albright fellows last year, or from faculty in elite universities, or from random people around the earth. And for quality of electorate candidates, the internet there was quite big, and newspapers and friend or family were among those that you would consult. Which is the category that you never chose? Ads. We never consult ads, right? Yeah, right. Advertisement can be profoundly powerful. I'll show you one ad that has really is one of the most best well-known ads in the world. It is the ad that Apple had in 1984 introducing the Macintosh.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
So, what do you think? Was that a powerful ad? It played only once. Only once. And we still talk about it and about the effect it had on the world. So there is, some advertisement that people care about, and actually it would be weird if people did not pay attention. Those of you who are familiar with the industry of advertisement, you know how much money has been, and those, for example, who are familiar with advertisement for elections, right? So I guess you're not among those who are for this kind of advertisements, but apparently there are many other people who are for that. So let me try to show you another movie to see if you would find this advertisement powerful. Don't know if you have seen it, but
1 month ago, I began a conversation with all of you, and so far, we haven't stopped talking, and that's really good. I intend to keep telling you exactly where I stand on all of the issues.
I'm looking at how to help you and other people who are hardworking like you. And I've really been impressed by how serious people are.
Because we all need to be part of the discussion, and we're all going to be part of the solution.
I don't want people who already agree with me. I want honest, experienced, hardworking, patriotic people who want to be part of a team, the American team. I hope you've learned a little bit more about what I'm believing and trying to do, and really helped this conversation about our country get started.
I hope to keep this conversation going all the way to November 2008.
Well, how are you feeling? You think that you are not influenced by advertisement anymore? Had you seen this before?
I actually didn't see this one.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty interesting. If you care about that, this was not an official Obama campaign. It was a guy who, with $1,000, got access to a computer and edited the video and just sent it and became viral. And then there was a lot of explaining that the Obama campaign had to do to say, no, that was not us, but damage, I think some says, has happened. So now that we have settled that question, that I think that we are all much more influenced and affected by advertisement that we would like to admit, would be impossible after all. We are affected by anything we learn. And advertisement is one of these things that is made very carefully so that it will affect us, right? So we do that. Let me try to help you understand a little bit how we are viewing the world around us. So here is you in the center of the world, as it is appropriate for a 20-year-old. And you're surrounded by friends and family, by teachers and colleagues, by your trusted advisors, by other trusted sources like the books. These are all the kind of the questions I gave you in the selection, ads and informations, and of course the web, which is what we usually call the internet, but the internet is really the wires that you see, these yellow wires behind the machines. The web is the information that it is contained, but we have it all in, confused like that. So we are like surrounded by this kind of information. Now let me redraw this picture again in a different way, in which I bring closer to you those sources which you care and consult more in important issues. So here you are again. I'm drawing what I call the trust networks. And your friends and family are usually pretty close. Your teachers and colleagues are not too far from there. Your trust advisors a little further out, your sources there, the acquaintances, and the answer informationals, and of course, the web, which, where should I put it? Well, it is around not only you, but everybody else, because they're also consulting the web. So this web, I have it like a cloud that's around all of us. And this is important to understand. It is affecting not only the way we think, but also the way that others think, who we use as the sources to consult. So as a computer scientist, I have to show you a little bit of a technical picture that qualifies as a technical picture. We call it a network. And a network is just a collection of nodes, entities, and then it has arrows which indicate the relationship between these entities. So when you see, for example, an arrow between you and democracy, it means that democracy is another entity, for example, that you are familiar with, and you have some understanding of the value of that. That's the arrow that goes to the entity called democracy. Your mom and your partner and her partner maybe, or your partner, doesn't matter here, it does not explain, are closer to you, and far away is somebody, maybe a plumber that you met at some point called Joe. I guess you got the joke, right? So this is your trust network. This is your network that you use every day to make decisions, but you usually don't pay that much attention to exactly its structure. But if you had like 5 minutes and you were to pull a pencil and a paper, you would be able to draw your own network. You would be in the center, and then the people that you know and you consult, or they exist, you would be there. And relationship between these people would be also there. So you would be able to explicitly define your trust network. Usually we never write it down. We just have it in our minds, right? And we use it like that. I'll explain to you why I start like this. Your network is also challenged, and it is challenged by any of these entities. Now, there is a devastation that happens every time we find out that some of these sources are affecting us negatively. That is, they do things for which they lose our trust. And the devastation goes upwards. If you see an ad and the ad says that this particular bottle of water is the best ever made, and you find out that actually no, there is a better one, you're not going to go around thinking, oh my God, what happened to me today? But if your friend or members of your family do that for you, you would really do that, and you might not be able to operate even for days when this happens. So there is a devastation that's going on like that. So how exactly your trust network is being challenged is through what we call propaganda. Charlie also mentioned about propaganda. Here is a definition that I would give you. So propaganda is an attempt to modify your behavior or everybody else's behavior. I have some words in red to indicate the importance in this sentence. And that way influence your actions. So propaganda is important when it can actually influence you. If it does not influence you, it's not successful. And how does it try to influence you? In ways beneficial to the ones who send the propaganda. So it is a way of modifying really what you have in mind, this kind of trust network that you have in your mind, and influence your actions accordingly. Propaganda is something that's going on, since the beginning of time, but it got this name really through the Middle Ages when the Catholic Church coined the term as a way of propagating the true religion to the natives of the Americas. It became quite an interesting topic in the First War and in the Second War, but then at that time there was a group in New York City which tried to study propaganda, tried to figure out how propaganda works, and came up with a wonderful book about propaganda analysis. And it came up with these general techniques for doing propaganda, which, however, indicate techniques to counter propaganda. So here they are. First, you have the word games, which is when you are using a particularly positive or negative words with some entity in one phrase in such a way that the listener would immediately be prepared to follow you. So if it is that thing is really terrible, you get to feel that it is indeed terrible because you just heard it in the same sentence. Or it could be the other way. It could be particularly good word. Then there is the technique called plain folk, where they try to make you think that people like us think that way. So if you are one of us, you are thinking this way as well. There is this so-called bandwagon technique, because you find out advertisers use that quite a bit. They want to make sure you understand that if you do not buy this particular, you're not going to be looking good. Like your outfit, you will not be along with everybody else. Not only advertisers, of course. Testimonial is another advertisers use a lot. So some famous people will start telling you that, maybe I dress up as a doctor and I look at this and I say, I drink this every day and I feel great. You probably know that I'm not a doctor, but just because I'm in this context, I have the white form, etc., it might appeal more. So most of the time, we're thinking of propaganda as the card stacking technique, in which we use bad logic. So we use a sentence, but in such a way that the therefores and the so in this sentence do not really imply what's coming before. But if you hear it in a nicely fluid sentence, you tend to believe that's probably like that. We get a lot of this, of course, in everyday interaction. And then the most powerful way of propaganda is the so-called transfer, which is when somebody is using his or her office to persuade you for things that they should not have an opinion. Usually, when you have, for example, a religious figure trying to tell you things about politics, or the other way around. Things that people should not have an opinion on because it's not their area of expertise in some sense, but because they are in generally respected, they can do that. So these are the challenges of propaganda, and we can think of this challenge of propaganda as actually the network I showed you before. So in the bandwagon technique, so the propagandists try to convince us that everybody is doing the same thing. If we were to visualize that, here is Joe the plumber, you find out that Joe the plumber is actually in the coffee joint group, and everybody knows each other there. So you suddenly start having some respect for this group because you transfer the respect you have for Joe the plumber. The testimonial technique, your famous actress might tell you something about, the great diet, and you start believing that, well, probably it is like that. I've seen her, she looks so slim and nice, so it probably has to do something with that. All of this introduction was because I wanted to tell you that the web is also a network, like the trust network that we have in our minds. But it is much more explicit there. So every web page, like the Wellesley, this is from years ago, as you can tell, you haven't seen snow like that for a while here. Every web page has what we call a URL, a descriptor. You're all familiar with that. And actually, you can decipher this description and tell you what exactly it means. It is an address that, if you click, you will end up in this other page. It is, one of these arrows that we saw before. And it is important because then search engines are able that way to use these information, these addresses, to actually go and explore the whole web. You're familiar a little bit with that? And you can see how that is a network. So now, the web, the search engines, and social networks like Twitter we were talking before have a lot of influence in us. 3/4, back in 2008, you can imagine that this number is greater. 3/4 of Americans have internet access, and more than half, actually, they have broadband. More than half, back in 2010, were getting information about the midterm elections through the web. 9 out of 10 back then were using the internet regularly. You can imagine daily. Is anybody who's not using a search engine in a day? And would you admit it even that you don't do that? And the social network have a smaller effect. At least Twitter has. It had back then. Now it is about 20% of the US population is using. Back in the 2010 elections was only 6%. But it's coming up. It is all of these social networks, they get more and more visibility. And let's see, I know who of you has Facebook accounts because I got the answer before. Any of you have Twitter accounts? Yeah, so it is, I guess, about 10%. So maybe you will have more or less, we'll see after that. If these are the numbers, what does it tell us about the importance that these tools that we use on a daily basis, some of us more than others, of course, play a role in our lives? It's probably a pretty important role they play. So if I were to redraw this trust network I was showing you before, here is us and here is the web. I drew it a little bit off the sides because I wanted to make a note that the fastest and the most common way that we access the web is through the search engines and the social networks. On a regular day, we don't try to go and type a whole URL there to find something. We just start from a search, where we start from a page that we saw at Twitter or Facebook, and then we click there and we access. So mostly we access the web through them. And that's why it is important. Now, it will not be surprise you, certainly, to tell you that the web is not necessarily very reliable, like this little cartoon is showing. This kid is very excited about something he found on the web, and his father is kind of thinking, come on, this you found on the web, is this so important? You can't believe it just because you find a website. And the kid counters that you're talking about. You cannot get more authentic than the nationalnews.com. In the meantime, somewhere else, the main editor of the officialnews.com is called to have supper. So in this world that we live, anybody can be an author. All of you are authors. I'm sure the moment you write something on your social networks, you have actually become authors on the web. Does it mean that everything we get we should believe? A few years ago, I had a survey with some of the students at Wellesley. Since then, this questionnaire actually has been duplicated in many other campuses, and the findings are the same. I used as a title, "Of course it's true." I saw it on the internet as a play from an expression that my father used to say when he wanted to explain to me that this is really true. He used to say, "Of course it's true. I saw it on the newspaper." Because for his generation, if it was printed, it was true. You couldn't get it easily out there if it was not true. In our case, we started behaving like that for the internet, and we confuse really the ease at which we find information with the validity of the information we are finding. So we forget that it is so much easier to find information, and everybody can be an author, and we tend to believe a little more than we should there. We have seen many, many examples over time. Now, you're all familiar with spam, right? And usually when we talk about spam, we talk about email spam. I want to make the distinction because I'm going to talk to you about a different type of spam called the web spam. But here is an example of a spam. They asked me at some point to go in and I put my personal information because my federal tax payment had troubles. Yeah, it is completely junk, of course, in there. But we get a lot of email spam, and so we're familiar about email spam, a lot of it. This cartoon, I think, shows very well how effective email spam is and how much it's flooding us. So they're in the island, and he finds this bottle, message in a bottle, and then he starts swearing, and the other guy says, "Wow, you got more of this spam?" It's coming to us from all different directions. There is a different kind of spam, which is called web spam. And I'll explain to you how web spam, it is not so obvious to detect. Here, some years ago, I did a search about human growth hormone. And it seems like everything I was finding was telling me that, look, with $39.95 per month, I can be thinner, more handsome, more sexy, more tall, whatever you want. Just give us this money. It seems like Google was conspiring for my $39.95. But other controversial issues like ADHD, I did at that time, it seems like there was no kind of official medical answer there, but the responses I was getting was what you could find later on was influenced by the Church of Scientology. And somebody could imagine, is Google being kind of governed by the Scientologists? That was not the case, of course, for all of these things. It was that Google and the other search engines was spammed. And this cartoon also shows even better what I'm trying to say. The old man and the child are discussing, and the man says that he has spent all his life trying to search for meaning. That's what we all try to do, find meaning in life. And the kid says, well, if it's not on Google, you're not going to find it. We tend to have this kind of closed world assumption that if it is out there, we'll find it. If you don't find it, it is because it's not out there. It is darn important. So if you don't have your message ranked high in the search results, you may as well not exist. And companies know that very, very much. That's why they make all this effort. So to give you a definition about what is web spam, hoping that you will actually remember another definition I gave earlier, web spam is an attempt to modify the web, modify, that is, the structure and the contents of the web, and that way influence the search engines in ways that the spammers will benefit. I guess you see the similarity with the other, and I can show you how this is being affected. In fact, it is so important and so profoundly available that every search engine has tried to deal with spam for years and years. In general, if you are curious about how the web operates, I will give you a very brief introduction there. And I would recommend that you still have time, if you have not taken a CS course, to take one, at least to get more about that. The search engines are just going through this kind of hyperlinks and collect information from all over the place and then create an index. And when you're asking a question, they give you back an answer. The most important part in this is the ranking. Because as you have seen, you get back a page and it says, I found 3.5 gazillion documents. But here are the first 10. So it is like editing. It is like somebody is making a decision of which ones should be the most important, and we treat them that way. How many of you have actually looked at page number 5 of the search results more than once? Well, you are a very unusual group. 82% of people never go even below the fold, that is the visible part of the screen, not even the first 10, but the first 5 of what you can see. You're very different in that respect. So the search engines have evolved pretty much in a way that they try to counter the spammers. And what we have seen as generations of search engines is really influenced by that. I'll start by showing you how the first one was the most scientific one and the most obvious. You're just looking at frequency of words in a document. The idea is that the more frequently some words occur, the more relevant the document is. So here is a bunch of books from Shakespeare, and on the left-hand side you have the different keywords. You count the words, that's what every search engine is doing, and then you normalize by the length of the document. And when somebody asks a query like "in the mercy of Caesar," what you're looking, a search engine says, okay, "in," "the," and "of" are not interesting words, they're everywhere, but the word mercy and Caesar are important. Let me count where they exist. It finds the word mercy there, it finds the word Caesar there, it sums up and it says, okay, the most relevant one is Antony and Cleopatra. And we are impressed, says yes, it is. So that's what happens. Now, if you were a spammer and you wanted your book to get ahead of this Shakespeare guy who's been promoted by different publishers around the world, how would you promote your book instead of those ones? For queries like "in the mercy of Caesar." Go ahead. Mercy Caesar, mercy Caesar. In fact, you would hide things like that. And of course, people would be annoyed if they were to see it. But if you were to print all of these mercies and Caesars in, say, white color text on white background, they wouldn't be very visible. Not to mention that you could even direct the search engines in one page and direct the humans in another as you do that. So here is called keyword stuffing. So the search engine, by the way, BMW was one of these infamous companies that tries to do that, and then it was punished by the search engines by saying, well, if you do these kind of things and you try to fool us, BMW, we're going to send you down to page number 100 in the search results. And you wonder why Google has this right? Well, the courts have decided that actually it does. So they try to come up with a better idea and says, well, it's not important that she said that. Who is she? If she is more important than her, we will give her more value, more weight. So what they do is that they start counting the number of links a site has, and the more links you have pointing to you, the more popular you are, then the more reliable you are according to this scheme. So you use similarity, but in addition to that, you also use popularity. And now the ball is back to you. You're not that popular, but maybe you can find other ways that you can still come ahead of the game by making yourself more popular.
You create a lot of pages that link back to the original.
Yeah, so you create what we call link farms. You create a lot of different sites in this case, and they all start pointing at each other. All of these pages are belonging to the company who's selling human growth hormone, and they just make them look that they're very different. But when the search engines go and visit them, they think, oh, they must be very important. But look, everybody's pointing to each other. So in fact, this was before the Google era. When Google comes up with this wonderful idea, it says, well, it's not important just to be popular. You have to be respectedly popular. And respectedly popular, the idea comes from the academic citations. So in academia, we give more value to the authors that are cited more often than others. And so they tend essentially to fall into what we call the rich get richer, where if you are cited more often, chances are more people will see your work, and then you will cite it even more. But that way, more people will be exposed to your work, and we have this situation in which some citations are much more visible than others. Some people have much greater credibility. So when Google came up with the idea, it looked like a killer. It looked like nobody will be able to beat that. I certainly thought that back then. But then I thought of a way that I could beat it. Can you think of a way to spam that? How can you become not just popular, but importantly popular? That's much more difficult, right? Well, on what issue? I mean, I'm maybe cited as a computer scientist, but as a person who knows how to dress, without the advice of my wife, I'm probably useless. So what they did is they created what I call the mutual admiration societies. They became popular in their own little disciplines. You know, one selling shoes, the other, you know, propagating Scientology, a third person selling, I don't know why, leather goods, etc., etc. And then they would all link to each other after some initial acceptance, and suddenly you will have these supposedly local authorities promoting everybody. So if you want to play this game, actually you can, since you're all here. Let's say tonight you can go to Boston, walk into a bar, and start talking casually so that others can hear you, and start, you know, pointing to different members of your group and say, oh, she is the best in that, you know, she's the best lawyer west of Mississippi, and this one, her empire has, you know, very quickly everybody will pay attention to you. That's what these admiration societies are doing. Pretty soon a whole industry was born. Some examples are here. You know, you would get to play this kind of game. Even CVs of this guy who was got a BA from Reed, got a master's from Cornell, got another master from Stanford. He's definitely very important, has visibility. If you look at the code behind his website, you will see that he has a lot of hidden links for human growth hormone. He's making a little money on the side. You know, college is good, but it's expensive. Maybe we can make some money by just doing this kind of pointing. Would be really cool. Exchange links, etc., etc. I will make this short because I want to get into more interesting stuff. This is one of the most ridiculous ones. They would go and start putting comments in somebody's wedding page, putting advertisement, yeah, etc., etc. Yeah. So, however, these kind of third generation search engines had another idea. It was not just reputation, was the value that comes with the anchor text. Now, what's the anchor text? You're all familiar with that. You probably don't know the name of it. The anchor text is the thing you select when you create a hyperlink. You know, sometimes you have written, click here to do that, right? But if you want to be a little more descriptive, instead of click here, you would say the list of all the universities in the United States, and you point to that page, and now your link, your anchor text is much more descriptive, right? So essentially, you put a bit of human intelligence in the creation of these hyperlinks. So search engines thought, that's beautiful. We can exploit all this collection of human intelligence and get information about web pages at the other end. So different pages are using different descriptions, different anchors for Wellesley, and then you find out from these anchors that Wellesley is a college, it is a liberal arts college, and it is a women's college, even though maybe the page of Wellesley never mentioned these things. Well, it does, but other did not. So how do you spam this kind of thing? Why would you want to spam it? Well, because you want your message to go higher up. Mm-hmm. Exactly. You create a link and you say maybe Wellesley College, but you send it somewhere else. Or, for example, you're creating a link that says miserable failure. How many? 30, 40 of us? We could actually do that. And then point maybe to the web page of George W. Bush. And pretty quickly, everybody who's searching for miserable failure hits George W. Bush. And becomes a very good joke, of course, and we all have a good laugh. And those who don't like it, they immediately do the same thing, and pretty soon Jimmy Carter, Michael Moore, Hillary Clinton come all in the group of the miserable failures. And this is called the Google bombs. As soon as Obama was inaugurated, he was hit by the same bomb as well. So it is one of the things that people do, and they do not only for fun, but they also do it for, say, political reasons. So in the 2000 elections, the word waffles was one of the most searched words, and it was going to John Kerry. At that time, he was considered to be kind of flip-flopping, and people use the word waffles for him. So you would do that. You would do other kind of misinformation. The words Egypt and Jew was one of these, that they were going to different places. The search engines were kind of upset with that, but they did not want to do anything, because essentially it was a way that people were using their algorithms in ways that they did not intend to. But that's what people do. They're usually unpredictable. Humans are good at that. So from that part, I want you to remember this thing. There is some close similarity between propaganda in society and web spam on the internet. And the two things actually are very closely related, even in the way that the techniques are being used. And the reason you can explain that is that both the way we are influencing our opinion, that others influence our opinion, and the way that the search engines are being influenced is the same. There is a network, and somebody can actually create this kind of process. Search engines are trying to do things. They keep trying to change the way they're doing searches all the time. Now they will tell you it's not just PageRank, but it is 200 different signals that they do. Still, the PageRank, this kind of initial idea, is the most important. But then you think like, well, if they're using 200 of them, it means that the most important one is not that important, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't need all these other help. In fact, we know that this is the case. Pretty recently, we had this interesting experience. The search engines are using hyperlinks independently on whether the comment is positive or negative. I never told you that the comment they were hyperlinking was positive or negative. All it has is the effect to bring it higher up in the search results. So if you get a lot of infamy, you will come up. So there was this guy who was selling, a scoundrel. He was selling fake glasses, supposedly were, famous designers. And then, you would pay your $300 for something that should have cost you $1,000. You were feeling happy. You get the glasses, you find out that they're fake. They're not Dolce & Gabbana. They're, Dolcissimo and go out of here. They just look the same, and then you would start complaining, and you would write on blogs that he is a scam. Well, guess what? Next time somebody else was trying to find information about glasses, this guy would come up right in the front. Why? Because so many were talking about him. And I have this little subtitle there because I find it really interesting. In Greek, the word fame, the word infamy, and the word advertisement are all coming from the same word, phimi. So phimi, dysphimacy, and diaphimacy are all connected, and you can see how it is connected. Of course, everything comes from Greek, and here is a proof. This part of the discussion had to do with the web. There is also manipulation that's happening in the social networks. I told you before that Twitter was one of these search engines that had very little presence, at least back in the 2010 era. And in 2010 in Massachusetts, we had some elections. And in these elections, there were one obvious to win candidate, a Democratic candidate, and one long shot, a Republican. Everybody knows that everybody in Massachusetts votes Democratic. It seemed like an easy task. Yet, what we observed at that time was that the searches for Mark Brown just before the elections were skyrocketing, much higher than the Democratic. And we're wondering why so many people are looking for that. Then we noticed what was happening. Search engines had started introducing in the third position of the search results coming from blogs and tweets. It is important to be in the top 10. And being in the third position, it is darn important. So the search engines were just looking to see what people were talking in real time, and they would put them in position number 3, and they would then get this kind of news. So your tweets would end up being in this location. And then we noticed that those tweets for Cockley were not so nice, and the tweets for Brown were much nicer. And so a lot of people were exposed in this kind of what we call a Google-enabled, a Twitter-enabled Google bomb. So if you're not very familiar with Twitter, I suspect not everybody is familiar with Twitter. It is a micro blogging messaging system. It's like your SMSs you're using, but instead of going to only one person, goes to a whole collection of persons. So you tweet when you just send this kind of up to 140 characters of SMS. And if somebody likes what you just said, can retweet it verbatim, just send it out, and you could reply. That part is like the usual SMS. So we collected this data to see what we could find, and we saw that we found about 250,000 tweets related to the Massachusetts elections just the 7 days before the elections, and we found that 41 of those were retweets. People were just broadcasting when they just heard. You know, it's like your message is being amplified big time. There was also a significant number of replies, 7%. We found that interesting. And we also found that 1 in 3 of those were just repeats. People would just repeat the same message again and again and again, which seems like a weird thing. Why would you repeat the same thing? If your friend with whom you're doing SMS keeps telling you every 5 minutes the same thing, would she be your friend? You know, it's the most annoying thing. But, you know, we figure out what was going on. Essentially, they were trying to repeat messages so that they will end up not in the 6% of the people using tweets, but in the 90% of people using Google. Because they would find this message. The more you retweet, the more you find it there. In fact, we saw that something that's obvious. If you disagree with a message, you would not retweet it. And in fact, the easiest way to separate liberals and conservatives was just looking at the way they would retweet. You don't even need to read a single tweet, just looking at the behavior of the people, who they retweet. When it comes to political message, you would separate them pretty well. So if you think that people might not know what you believe politically, they don't even have to read what you write. They only have to see how you communicate, with whom you communicate. And that way, it will be more than obvious about what you believe. It's kind of disturbing in some sense. The repeatings, as we said, had to do with this kind of Google-enabled, Twitter-enabled Google bomb. They were trying to affect others. And the replies, what were the replies? It seemed in the beginning that the replies was engagement. We initially thought, well, here is democracy at work. People want to talk to others. That's beautiful. It wasn't exactly like that. What was a little bit of a scam where 9 accounts in a short period of time, 138 minutes, started sending replies to people who were unaware of them, giving them misinformation. All of the people they sent the messages were actually people who were following the political process. And all of these accounts just lived for a while. Twitter immediately, you know, within less than 2 hours, closed them down. However, their message was propagated for over a day just before the elections, reaching over 6,000 accounts. We found this pretty interesting. To whom this was going, in the beginning we could not find who was behind that. It turns out that it was something called the, where I have it there, the, here it is, American Future Fund, a group of conservative Iovans who were the same people who were behind John Kerry's attack with the Swift boat back in 2004. They were just experimenting with a new medium. You know, how do you spread misinformation in this new world? So they were kind of the initial masterminds in that. But that was not the only attack that we found. We found another attack. So imagine that, like Charlie, you're a journalist and you're doing your business there. You're writing things that you think are important. And suddenly you start getting messages telling you that you are not doing the right thing. You're not speaking about the right thing. You're kind of not selecting, not being fair. So this was a seemingly grassroots movement from people who were believing in the same cause, but they were targeting journalists, sending to journalists messages telling them that you should not say what you say, you should say something else. It made it look like a grassroots. It was what we call an astroturf type of movement, because they had a collection of tweets that you could use every day to appear as if you wrote them yourself. But to the reporters at the other end, to the journalists, it seems like people were paying attention to them and they were not very happy. So it was a way of putting pressure on the journalists. So, all right. After I've scared you with all of these things, how do you figure out then what to believe of the things you find on the internet? It would be nice if that was the case. You know, you just go and you click in critical thinking and you click on answers and you find all of these things. But this is not really what happens. It is much more complicated, right? It is much more complicated. And actually, I would like to suggest in the remaining minutes that it is even more complicated than what I have described so far. And let me explain what I mean, that it is even more complicated. I showed you this picture before, and I said, well, that's how your personal trust network is being challenged, right? That's not telling the whole story. There is another place in which your trust network is being challenged. It is by you, by your very own abilities, because you are the one that have to make decisions at the end. So let's think for a second, how do you know what you know? There are lots of things that you have learned in your life, you believe, you have proven, etc., etc. How exactly do you figure out what to believe? In general, you could say, well, there are extrinsic reasons and intrinsic ones. The extrinsics are the ones that you trust, the ones that provide this information. For example, I hope that you trust your professors. The moment you trust your professors, you don't expect them that they are going to fool you. If they do, well, you will be really upset. But usually, you would trust what they say because it would be too tiresome to actually question everything you hear from them. And then there are intrinsic reasons. Your own experience. You tend to believe your own experience, right? Because it happened to you, and that's pretty important. And also your ability to think critically. And what does it mean to think critically? You hear this so many times. You know, you have to think critically. Well, what exactly does it mean? I'll tell you what it means for me. It means really to use the scientific method in a habitual way to get answers on important matters, not on everything. But when something is really important for your life, for the way that you operate as a human being, you should use the scientific method. What is it? Well, you have to figure out what is the hypothesis. What is it that you are challenging to see if you believe it or not? That's your hypothesis. And then you start checking how could you prove or disprove it. Figure out how would you search for answers to that. Searching is easy, all right? We can get a lot of answers. Figuring out, you know, which ones are supported stronger than others is the important thing, correct? So that would be what you would do next. Then try to figure out if you can shoot down that hypothesis or support it. That takes time, takes effort. And you don't want to do it for every issue, but you actually have to do it if you want to be sure that you know what you're talking about. It is tough and requires education. What do I mean that it is tough? Well, what we know is a lot of things that we do not question. For example, we know the things that we learn as children, right? Some of them we have abandoned. Do you remember something that you learned as children and you believed it and now you don't believe it anymore? Santa Claus, right? And the fairies and the elves. And what's the difference between an elf and a... That was a joke that happened to Facebook, I think, different. But probably there are other things that you've learned as children that you do not question. And it would be very uncomfortable if you try to question it. Anytime you go to take an exam, you know that your memory is failing you. We do not have it, you know, the computer will always file a file that you have stored in there, but your memory is not. We do not have really a database as we would love to in our brain, and all we have to do is just retrieve it. Every time we remember something, we actually recreate the memory. And very often, the recreation will be incorrect. as every time you took, the wrong answer in a, though I knew the answer. How did? Well, in the process, you just misunderstood it. Yeah, misunderstanding is another way. You thought you heard that I said that, and then you tend to believe that this is the case, but maybe it was not. Humans, for example, are very good at doing pattern matching. Art is, in its basic form, pattern matching by humans. Research is a lot of pattern matching. But we use pattern matching every day. I had a little event organized here some time ago, and then I looked after I produced the poster. Do you see any face there? How many faces do you see? You can see a lot of faces, right? You want to tell me that this is a face? We are powerful pattern matching machines, and we find patterns even when they don't exist. When you play with Photoshop, your image can really get scrambled, and you trying to see faces where they don't exist. So we do that all the time. Very often is extremely powerful. As I said, in art, this kind of pattern matching is exceptionally important. In science as well, but it can also be misleading. Also, you know that when we're thinking after we have consumed things, we don't think particularly clearly, right? And you may have made decisions late at night that you regret the next morning, or at any other time. Or when we don't sleep a lot, or we sleep a lot, and we hear voices and all of these things. We also don't think and don't believe carefully things when we decide under fear, or under anger, or with personal interest, or just using a logical sequence that we do not pay particular attention, right? So it sounds like I'm bringing you bad news, but you're all familiar with that. We just tend to ignore them and believe that we don't usually make these mistakes. I'm sure you can find more of these examples. And you wonder, well, each one of you don't make this, but have you observed others doing that? Usually we're much better in detecting these problems at others than for ourselves. And that's what makes it difficult. It's not that we are stupid, it is that our brain is impressive and complicated and everything, but also it's not perfect. It has limitations. It could have problems by manufacturing, as I would say. It is influenced by our feelings, our senses, the environment, what we smoke, what we drink, what we think we know. It is not just one thing. Often you probably, whenever you have to make a decision, you think that your brain is not like one entity, but it is a committee trying to tell you what to do. And one part of your brain says, do that. And the other says, no, you don't do that. And a third says, well, maybe you want to do some of this and some of that. It's like there is a fight in there. Well, the reason is that we do not have like a single brain there, but we have a collection of brains that have evolved over time. And let me go and show you that, not that in particular, but I want to show you another video, if I can find it quickly. Where is it? Yeah, here it is. Here is one. So here is, there is an internal small brain which we call the reptilian brain, which is the one that responds very quickly to things like fear and anger and hunger and sex desire and stuff like that. This is the most powerful, and with age we tend to suppress it more and more, but the younger you are, this is kind of taking more control of you. Then you have the brain that is surrounding that. That's the brain that came from the mammals. Then the primate brain, one surrounding the other. And then the human brain, which is surrounding all the others, which is much, much larger than the others. And that's important that it is so much larger. And you essentially, every time you try to make sense of all these brains, what they tell you, you want at the same time to feel in control. You don't like not feeling in control. You don't like randomness. Nobody does. We try to find a reason behind everything that happens. That's why people become superstitious. You know, what does it mean that Charlie and I wear the same colored jacket today? You think it was random? Right? So we try to find explanations even when there isn't one. That part of the brain I was telling you, the human one, is huge. It means, compared to the others, it means that it requires a lot of blood to work. Without blood, our brain does not work, or at least does not work very well. In fact, a lot of the mental disorders might have to do with some part of the brain not being infused with blood enough so it does not work as well as it could. So what we do, and you all know that every time you study, even though you're just sitting at a chair, not moving, you get exhausted. You get up and you're like you were running a marathon and you think like, oh my God, how I feel. Well, it's because you were using that part of your body that requires a lot of energy. So what do? We try to avoid using that as much as possible. So we use heuristics. We create, stereotypes. Everybody who goes to Roxy, that's a bar downtown Boston if you haven't gone, it is definitely one of them, and you tend to believe that, all right? Or personal ways of thinking. And we believe that this kind of heuristics, yeah, most of the time they might work, but you know how misleading they can be, These kind of stereotypes are behind some of the major problems we have as society, right? And the ease with which we go for that. So, I'll finish right here with just 1 minute over time. What I want you to remember for all of this, well, misinformation on the web and in the social web is here to stay, also with society. Propaganda and advertisement is not going far away. And unfortunately, we are part of the problem sometimes because we are get into the same. Finding information is easy. Evaluating is the difficult thing because our trusted resources might challenge us. Thinking critically is important, but you have to understand why you believe what you believe. And finally, you have to remember that in this century, to be illiterate, it does not mean that you just don't know how to read and write. That used to be the definition of illiteracy. To actually be educated means that you understand what technology does for you and how it works. You should not shy away from understanding how technology works, because you can. Don't let anybody tell you you cannot understand how the big search engines or the computer works. If you think that this is not the case, come to my class. Here is an advertisement right there. And I can guarantee that you will learn that. You also need to think critically, even though it is tiresome. All I can promise is that if you do that, you will be much more successful than if you didn't, because you will be fooled far less often than those who don't follow that. Thank you.
If you could talk a little bit about how when different people search the same thing on the web, how based on their search histories, they often come up with different results and the phenomena and implications of that.
Right. It seems like you search and next to you I search and we find different things, and sometimes it feels like serendipity. Look at this. The shoes I was looking for yesterday, in Zara, it comes this morning today when I'm looking at my coursework in, how on earth? Well, it's not random, of course. It is that you're leaving digital traces every day wherever you go. So every time you're clicking on anything on the web, there is a log that's been kept about all the places that you have visited. Pretty quickly, there is a profile about who you are and what you like that is being created. So Amazon, for example, will come from time to time and will show you a bunch of different books, and you will be surprised. How do they know that I might like these kind of things? Well, it is because you did something like that. You bought such a thing before. In other cases, it might be just looking at what you searched yesterday in one advertisement in one company, and then that company uses this information to give you an advertisement in a different place. If you don't want this to happen, on your browser you should shut down the cookies that are coming from third parties, because it's the third parties that they collect this information. It is also the way they make money, of course, but if you don't like that, do. By the way, political organizations use exactly this technique very, very much. It's called micro-targeting. So in this room, you might be all going to, say, the website of the candidates for president, and each one of you might get a different message about what really matters, say, to Obama at these elections. And the reason is that political organizations also use this information to the degree that now it's called nano targeting. Not only for a particular person, but the particular interest of this person at this day. I'm sorry I didn't have a better answer or a more cheerful one, but that's what happens. There is no serendipity on the web. It did not come accidentally.
Hi, my name is Christine. Thank you so much for your talk. So I was wondering, you gave us a lot of great advice for thinking critically and using our judgment in a censorship-free environment. But what kind of advice would you give to people who are living in a society where there is censorship, and how can they use their search engine to access the true information?
Oh, very, very important issue, of course, because technology, it's not good or bad. It is both. It can be used in one way, it can be used another way. It's like even the wrong question to ask if technology is good or bad. And the same technology that in one case might be used to open up society, to open up awareness, in another case it might be used to track down dissidents, to attack them, etc., etc. So it is this kind of openness. It's not just good just because it exists. If you care about really keeping your privacy, which is a huge issue and something that we are not managing very well as humans. Actually, we have reasons to do a lousy job in that. But if you care about your privacy, then what you have to do is in your sensitive communication, use cryptography. That is, use a service which will encrypt your messages. And if you want to be even transparent to with whom you're communicating, use proxy services which will essentially hide your direct communication. So let's say this is something that Chinese who do not want to be tracked by their government use very often. They use a service, for example, called Tor, T-O-R, which service is a network of servers. By the way, a server is like a computer like this, which, however, is not only retrieving information but also serving information. And usually, they're kept in closets because they generate a lot of heat because they work all the time. So there are a lot of servers around the world. And so when you want to connect with somebody, instead of sending to this somebody, you send it to Tor, which then will start picking up a sequence of random paths and eventually get your message there. But whoever monitors their connection would not be able to tell who sent it. And if you also send it encrypted, you're completely covered.
I have a question about, so like Christine said, you gave us a lot of advice about thinking critically, but how do we distinguish between looking at resources that we agree with and looking at resources that are truthful?
Oh, extremely important questions, right? Because as we said, our brain will not necessarily help us in that. The first step is to be aware that you're doing that. There are many ways in which we fool ourselves. For example, you might find two people say that they disagree completely on things like global warming. And then a new report comes that gives several data about global warming. You could have these people read the very same reports and pick up selectively the things that they support their argument. Because we are lazy using our brain, we would rather find these things that they enhance our prior belief than changing our belief. And people do that. Voting, in case you haven't noticed, is not a process of selecting logically who's the best person. It is a process in which your emotions are leading you to figure out who you should support. People do a lot of things about this kind of emotions. Who you will, marry to is also another of these things, right? The first thing is being aware that you do that. And the second is that from time to time, you're actually going and you are challenging your beliefs. You play this kind of devil's advocate and says, what if what I believe was not true? If you want to help somebody else find this, it matters how you tell them. If you try to confront them and tell them in an aggressive way, are you stupid? Do you believe in Santa Claus? You know, for God's sake, you're bound to actually make them believe in Santa Claus even more. Right? Try this with any little child that, is like 10 years old and they are not really sure. Try to confront them like that, and you will see that for the next 5 years, they will really believe that it is and will try to prove to you. So emotions on how we learn is important. And there are many more things. This is more than a course that we would have here. I'll come back to you, Tricia.
So I have questions about the two main websites that we use pretty much every day. One is Google. So it has all these information on even like basically telling who I am, right? Because when I Google my name there, I can see like my Facebook page and stuff like that. And is there any regulation on how they handle all this kind of information? And the second question is about Wikipedia. So we rely so much on Wikipedia to tell us things, but it's edited by everybody on the web. So whether this is true, I don't know, but I totally trust it. So how
you use it, right? Yeah. These are also beautiful questions. So your first question was, well,
So how Google handles all these?
Yeah. So there is no regulation that says how Google or any search engine does. Google is doing something that's better than others, which is it gives you a handle of letting Google know what it will know about you. There is a function in Google called the dashboard. So if you go into your account, you will see the dashboard. And in there, you might be shocked the first time you go. It will list all the things that Google knows about you. And you could go and shut down particular things. So even if you do not know who you are, just looking at the searches you have done, to whom you have responded to, you will get a good idea of who you are. So you could go and shut those down, or at least some of those, the ones that you think. And I have to put a plug here. One of the major persons who introduced Dashboard is a Wellesley alumna who graduated, if I recall correctly, in 2003. Betsy Masiello is her name, and she works at Google, and she's promoting this kind of openness and ability to control. Not every organization out there does that. More famously, Facebook, which owns everything that you have written, all your photographs, and there is nothing you can do to take them back. Even though from time to time you may have seen this kind of declarations that I forbid you, Facebook, for using any of this. They have already taken all of this way before. And by the way, there are copies everywhere for these kind of things. Normally, that's how computers operate. That's how networks operate. For your second question about Wikipedia, this is the beauty of crowdsourcing. So I scared you probably about all the things that each one of us can make mistakes, right? Each one of us can believe silly things, and it takes us a while to realize. For the others is easier to recognize. However, if you take a group of people, even if they are not experts, and you take a majority vote on any issues, you're much more likely to discover the truth. I guess the whole concept of democracy is based exactly on this idea of crowdsourcing. That though each one of us, no matter how enlightened the leader can be, is bound this leader to make stupid things, it is countered by voting of hopefully well-informed people. The majority are much more likely to do that. In fact, I play this game in my classes. I start one of these by giving people questions for which I'm sure they do not know the answer because they're technical questions, right, in computing. And then I ask them just to take a quick look and tell me which answers they think is correct. Every time I've done it, and I've done it many times, the majority comes up with the right time. It's not that you will find any single student that get all the answers right. But for each question, the majority is much more likely to get it right than any other. So crowdsourcing is this amazing thing, and Wikipedia is based on crowdsourcing. It's based exactly on this idea that you open it up and people will disagree, and eventually something that's more correct than others will come. Of course, you should pay attention whenever you get into a Wikipedia article and the beginning says, some of this is controversial. It says that the crowd is not agreeing. And it could be actually a good way of detecting propaganda. And Tricia.
This is going to have to be our last question.
Yes. Make it good, Tricia.
Okay.
Sorry.
So in the last year, the Federal Trade Commission has been really cracking down on the idea of third parties collecting data without people consenting to this idea. But arguably, the advertisers are arguing that this is making the web less user-friendly because it's not targeting ads at people and their interests. So should there be more regulations like the FTC proposes, or should there be less to protect the privacy of consumers?
I'm glad you asked me this question, because this is one that I have a very short answer. I don't know. There are pros and cons in both cases. We are very quickly getting into protecting the immoral, really, ways of using information. I mean, it becomes illegal when we're able to figure out what should not happen and we try to regulate it. However, regulating opinion and way in which communication happens is enormously difficult. And we know, for example, it has failed many ways. The reason we have so many legislations about the Communication Act is because every time we do what we think is right, and we figure out just 6 months later that we got it wrong. And then we redo it, and then we redo it. And now we have kind of given up, because it is not always easy to find an answer through regulation. I wish I had a better answer. If I tell you what I think is going to be just my opinion, for which I would not really fight very hard. Thank you.